I'm here at the Cherry Building because the wife has like kicked me out of the house after, exposing some of our, defects in the house. So don't worry, today I'm COVID free, nothing to worry about. Oh, okay, so we're all set. We're all like, hopefully you guys are safe and that everything is all right, as they say. I got a little sun yesterday, so that was good. Hopefully you guys are able to go outside and maybe you're not congregating, but you're okay. I'll try to get now for all the students who all get obsessive over this, the few students that see this or listen to this by this time, I'll get to the APUSH stuff. We're getting into the 60s today, okay? So just hang on. I'm just trying to make some few announcements here, all right? So anyway, Mr. Schranker is still going to retire, so make sure next Thursday or Friday you shoot him an email saying your goodbyes and your well wishes. I think last time I kind of said if there's a gift, but you don't have to send anything via email or something like that. I think it's just a shout out. And I'm going to send, reminders to you and your parents too as well next Wednesday or something like that to say that, if you want to send Mr. Schranker a message. Everybody gave a great send off to Ms. Brandon. Especially the juniors, seniors, and the super seniors. They did an excellent job. All right. So now, without further ado, because I know you want to get to it, the few students here, is that I'm hoping so much that you guys keep your brains into this and that you really are trying to, listen to a few minutes of this, maybe look at a little bit of biology that's going to be coming up that I'm pretty sure Ms. Johnson will do in English. That is kind of like, presented to you. There are no, again, assignments per se, but you'll be doing yourself a disservice not to expect something, no matter when we come back, if we come back, that some kind of maybe final assessment to that point. So think about that. So, and it's just good anyway because it's not going to go on forever, and you think eventually you still need to get ready to transition into senior year, transition into higher education, and taking your college courses. So you don't want to keep just your brain needs exercise, and this is part of it. All right, so probably the 60s is going to be 3 videos. It's just a huge decade of content, events, happenings, really changes that's going on here. So that's why the 60s, I'm going to be doing about 3 of these in a way, because it is really that dense, and it's really that's why you're seeing in video series that I said that they have the 60s, they have the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, even the 2000s. But the 60s is really probably their best effort because there's just a lot of stuff going on, So, and here's the thing is I say this, and listen, this is time to really tune in to get the big ideas of here. 60s will continue the civil rights movement for African Americans, as well as it will spill over influence civil rights for women, civil rights for Native Americans, civil rights for, gays and lesbians, like that, civil rights for Hispanic people. And it really is a kind of heightened kind of time for people, or it kind of like, strike the iron while it's hot, put it in the fire, is that, for equal rights, because the African American movement is really this is a time where they do kind of get things kind of settled with the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, another Civil Rights Bill like in 1968. So really a lot of people are talking about not only black power by the end of the 1960s, but red power, yellow power, pink power, brown power, all those types of things here that's probably a little bit antiquated in 2020 is going to be representative of this kind of like heavy protest movement. And on that note, so we got civil rights, 1960s, continuing on. We have counterculture. You have the new left movement coming around, the like with Tom Hayden in the Port Huron statement up there in the University of Michigan, saying that the left is this is going to be really the foundation of what you see Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren kind of continuing in a way. This is kind of the really liberal, Mr. Price, communist left. The kind of, peace in war, help out your fellow man, redistribution of wealth, something a little bit more, not evolutionary, not a slow change, but a little bit more revolutionary. They will have protests, kind of like, class sit-ins, taking over of like, certain college campuses, things of that nature. So, and then you just got some people like Timothy O'Leary, that's his name, like that, in San Francisco, saying things like, turn on, tune in, drop out. Just drop out of everything. Now, I know you're saying, oh, Mr. Price, he means that, you should be like some hobo or something like that, some homeless person. No, he's just trying to say, look, all this stuff of going to college, getting a job, is so like, 1950s. It's so suburban. It is so conformist. They're more hippie-ish, not beatnik. All right, because they're saying that what should be like, you should be more, they're more like the transcendentalists of the 1840s and 1850s here, that you should make some kind of like, if anything, positive impact to your society. Feed your fellow man, help your fellow man, make our society greater. We keep, producing guns and weapons and everything, fighting a war in Vietnam when we should be trying to like do something at home. And fight discrimination. They want to be part of. You have these like really middle class, whites talking about like going down there for Freedom Summer in 1964, wanting to do this, part of this new left movement. And you even have people just like say, hey, you not only we have advances in medicines and science where you can kind of get in touch with yourself. You do get an expansion. Not most people in the 60s experimenting with drugs and new drugs that just around, things that's like becomes more available, from an LSD to like more prevalent use of marijuana. So you do see this kind of in there, and really, delaying marriage, having multiple partners, kind of this kind of sexual revolution. Pill is being more like, in use now, more use of like, things that will prevent pregnancy. You have, that's kind of the counterculture. So counterculture, civil rights, and I have two specific things about the 60s that it really sums up the 60s in a way. You have to take a look at it. Is Vietnam and the Vietnam War and our involvement into that. It is just so prevalent in the 60s. It really takes down, presidents during this time here. So, wait a minute, somebody's here. Okay, I thought only me and Hugo was here for today, like that. So somebody, Mr. B just came in, Mr. Burgess just came in like this to pick up some stuff. So that's why I like, kind of like, it's like, hey, what's going on here? So, like no COVID. And so, but Vietnam is very prevalent in there. We will get into that maybe in part 2 of the 60s. And now you got thinking about, I need a third part for like the end of like the 1960s in a way. And I'm telling you, there's one year. Everybody talks about a 1907. I'm reading a book right now, 1959, 1927, year that changed, America. This might be in hindsight, or as we like, deal through this, maybe a changing year for us in 2020. So people might be writing about this year as being a kind of transformative event. But right now, 1960s, 1968, you have multiple assassinations. King, Robert Kennedy. You have the Tet Offensive. You have really at the end, finally, we get Americans orbiting like the moon in December of that year. You just to name a few of the events, but 68, a lot of people were thinking there's not even going to be a 1969 away what America was going through with the Democratic Convention, like those riots in Chicago. People were really thinking that. All right, so let's get started here. We're going to get it. And the thing is, I always say about this, about the decades, really the 60s do not begin really till probably, unfortunately after Kennedy's assassination. And you still got the 1950s kind of like into the 1960s in a way, culture-wise and kind of identity-wise. Please, let me just say, go to the Moodle. I always make a Beatles montage so you guys can see what the, how the Beatles changed from the 50s into the mid 60s to the end of the 1960s. Just look at their appearance, just look about their music, how it kind of changes. I didn't say they're like the best band in the world or the best band or you should like their music, but it's very historical. So go to the Moodle, besides the outline notes that I have here for you, and take a look at that, maybe for a few minutes or whatever like that. But I always usually make a clip thing of the Beatles each and every year. This year wasn't able to make a fresh new one, but that's the one from 2017. But it's really representative of that time. Just watching that, you'll see the 60s changing from the 50s into the 60s and almost getting to the early 1970s away just by listening to music and looking at appearance. 1960 is the election year. Eisenhower's dealing with a couple of things. There was supposed to be an East-West summit, but a U-2 spy plane is shot down, and he's dealing with like a canceling that summit. And now his vice president, Richard Nixon, is running against John F. Kennedy. FYI, Bridge of Spies is a good movie about the kind of like the U-2 spy plane going down and all this espionage. Kennedy versus Nixon. We have some of the first television debates, and there are going to be 3 of them, I believe. If I do my accounting correct, but probably the first one was probably the most prominent and the most historical in a way. People always say that Kennedy came across better on the screen, better than Nixon. You can go to YouTube and see that, see all types of analysis. They say people listen on the radio sounded like Nixon won, but looking at television that Kennedy had a better screen presence. So it kind of forever changes things about like politicians appearing on video or on the screen. Incidentally enough, though, they don't have any more debates until like really back to Ford and Carter. So it's not like presidential debates starts following each and every time there's a presidential election. There's not. It really starts with gets back to it with Ford and Carter after the Watergate affair, and we've always had some kind of presidential debate. So Kennedy wins, very close election. I know people might rank that John F. Kennedy spends less than 200 days really as president, but as one of those top presidents. But really Nixon is popular too. He's under Eisenhower's a very popular president. Close election. Some always steals this kind of like accusation that Kennedy and his father did some kind of buying some votes in Illinois. He wins about, I think about over 95 electoral votes, but the popular vote is almost less than 100,000 that he beats, Nixon on. Nevertheless, Kennedy wins, and there's also controversy. He's Catholic, and he's young for president at the time, 43. He's not the first Catholic running. I know you've forgotten about Alfred E. Smith running against Herbert Hoover in 1928. And Kennedy has to go on television and say, hey, I'm not a puppet of the Pope. you know, all our Catholicism kind of discrimination ever since from the 19th century with the Know Nothing Party, the American Party, being very discriminatory against, or very like, apprehensive about the Catholic people coming here in America. All right, now let's do Cold War kind of like timeline. It gets very, we'll get into it a little bit here. Don't worry, keep up the notes. Maybe you're listening to this. Maybe, I don't know, you're watching. Who knows if you made it even to this time. You remember our friend Castro comes to power in 1959, right? So he's there, and already Eisenhower's thinking by 1960s, you know how he's worked with the CIA, to kind of do some counterinsurgency, maybe like take out any pro-communist forces that's really about 60 miles away from Key West. He does not want this kind of, communist supporter in here. So they're already thinking about it, maybe an invasion of Cuba, not by Americans, but kind of expatriates of like, Cuba. Because what Castro and Che Guevara have done, they've nationalized all the industry, kind of taking out all the casinos in Cuba, taking over people's lands and made it like part of the government, kind of made, for this kind of socialistic kind of communist paradise. And so Eisenhower said, hey, get these expatriates, CIA, we'll have an invasion. Well, Ike, is out before the plan is like really put in play. It's 1960. Kennedy, as soon as he gets in, kind of hears about this plan. It's not his plan. It's Ike's plan. He's going to CIA. And Kennedy is a cold warrior. He's a Democrat, but he is, again, is going to be always supporting these kind of like, for the most part, the Truman Doctrine, the domino theory, and he's going to come up with his own doctrine, we'll talk about in a second, that you should know about, that's going to be representative of him. And he goes through with this invasion that's going to take place, and one of the main landing invasions by these expatriate Cuban rebels is the Bay of Pigs. It's supposed to get CIA support. There's some bad weather. It goes horribly wrong. A lot of, Castro's forces captures like, a lot of these Cuban exiles, over 1,000 of them. And, Kennedy says, call it off. We're not going to like pursue. We're not going to start bombing Cuba and escalating this thing. It's just, it's a failure. And he even goes on television and says it's a failure. He takes full responsibility for it, even though it wasn't planned. Bay of Pigs invasion. That summer, Khrushchev has already been, upset about what's happening in Berlin, inside of East Germany, and he's saying that, like, a lot of the, people in West Berlin have been taking our East Berliners out, or a lot of people from West Berlin are infiltrating and spying on, the East Berliners. It's a lot of propaganda there. So they said, look, we're going to fence up. We're going to wall up, all right? So I know everybody thinks about this like Berlin Wall, but it's not like, instantaneously you can put up some kind of like big concrete wall. So what he does, he kind of seals in East Berlin, very restrictive access, like maybe workers going from the east to the west, but land and air access, unlike, 1948, it's still like, permissible. It's still like, you can't get into, West Berlin. So it's not a blockade, but you see walls and fence being erected where people cannot just freely, like all the East Berliners, like, it sucks over here. Let me just go ahead and get into West Berlin, eventually maybe even get into West Germany and just, work there, have opportunities there and settle there. So it was definitely, they were, taking some of the best and brightest people from the East Berlin. It's really their choice, too, that they kind of saw the writing on the wall. Think about North Korea and South Korea. Think about, like, the, where would you want to be at this time? So you had the Berlin Wall kind of going up. And I say put that in kind of quotation because everybody's thinking that it just, flows up that summer. No, it's really a bunch of fences and barbed wire that's going up. All right, so October that year, well, really in September, like, our spy planes are seeing, like, missile silos in place in Cuba. Kennedy says, no, you cannot do that. Once again, so we're going to quarantine Cuba. I know we know that word, but he's kind of like effectively kind of blockading any kind of like, shipments from the Soviet Union into Cuba. We've seen these kind of missiles. They're not going to be this close to the Western Hemisphere. So you got a week in October where you don't know what the Soviet response is going to be. Khrushchev is saying, hey, we're going to, place missiles there. If we're sovereign countries, we're trading, you have no business with Cuba. So it looks like it's going to be some kind of nuclear, war here, and people are really preparing. Probably the closest we've ever been, besides some mistakes, that there's going to be nuclear war in America in 1961 in October. A lot of government officials are warning their families, like, if you hear the sirens go off, because we don't know what's going to be reaction as these missiles are being delivered over the Atlantic to Cuba, what's going to happen with the blockade around, who's going to fire first. People are already telling Kennedy, maybe you should go ahead and invade Cuba. Or how about this, make a first strike. Maybe you can, win a nuclear war if you go ahead and fire now. Kennedy, give him credit, along with Khrushchev. There, you have like, ships meeting almost like in close contact, warnings. Nobody fires a real, like, big shot to escalate the war. Soviet ships turn back. They negotiate kind of an agreement where the U.S. promised they would not invade Cuba. That kind of like lets Castro kind of, save face a little bit that he will probably remain in power for the most part in Cuba if, the U.S. pledges not to do that. They're going to take the missiles out. And it's going to be, really verified, followed up by the U.S. And Kennedy tells Khrushchev that he's going to take missiles out of Turkey. Does not let the public know, because Kennedy wants to seem like he kind of won, or the U.S. won this kind of standoff with Khrushchev in October. And this is the Cuban Missile. And I think that's something that you guys have kind of learned since the beginnings here. So, in 1963, kind of that Kennedy and the Soviets signed a nuclear test ban treaty that bans all atmospheric testing. China and France do not sign that. Eventually, you're going to get a kind of test ban, treaties that would, avoid testing all above ground or in space. But so that's again, culmination in that as a result of kind of like these tensions that's headed into the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, the thing that's brewing up with Kennedy too here is about as far as Cold War is Vietnam. You cannot just right now. You have a Catholic kind of Vietnam leader in South Vietnam, and Kennedy's kind of supporting him because he's kind of pro-Western in a way, so he's anti-communist. That is beginning to escalate because he's a very unpopular leader. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I just want to touch on that. And finally, somewhat in a way, it's not like the end of all the Cold War events away, but Alliance for Progress. Kennedy says, hey, Latin America is already, their reason why one of the reasons why Castro comes to power, they get a Marshall Plan for Europe. Where's the Marshall Plan for Latin America? They get millions instead of billions, and they're very resentful. Communist regimes rise up, and as you know from the 1900s, you say, well, Mr. Price, the U.S. has always been in Latin America. Yes, and almost like, calling the shots. And, kind of with Guatemala in 1954, taking over democratically elected leaders, in saying that the elections in Nicaragua are like null and void, Woodrow Wilson. So they have a lot of resentment there. So you see this growing kind of, communist growth. So Eisenhower and Kennedy trying to put more money. So it's called Alliance for Progress, like that. And they try to combat these kind of, temptations to go commie, right? Good. All right. So, and I know that's a lot. And, if you follow up on the notes and stuff, want to hear my voice at this time, that's fine. I'm going to take a little cup of Joe here. So I get a little swig here, and we'll go into the civil rights movement here because it's very dense to get one of this timeline in this. So, oh, that's delicious. So, We ended up with the, sit-ins with the Greensboro 4 in 1960 and starting that kind of desegregation movement that's going across here. You have Martin Luther King and Mr. Shuttlesworth, that's another guy you don't have to know and you don't care about anyway, that formed the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that really is the kind of Martin Luther King's kind of civil rights protest group. You have at Shaw University, I told you, all praise to Ella Baker, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. On the civil rights videos, they're always going to be referred to as SNCC. Really the ones that kind of, inspired the sit-ins at Woolworths, and really is going to inspire, they're going to have a prominent role more in the kind of Freedom Summer of 1964 instead of the Freedom Riders in 1961 that's coming up here. So we have a very, very, kind of like, dense timeline as far as what's going on here with the Civil Rights Movement. And the big one in 1961 is the kind of Freedom Riders, RIDERS. These are people of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. That's the main part. They're not the NAACP. It's not really SCLC. SCLC is mostly based in the South, all right? So they're dealing with massive resistance to Southern Manifesto, all that kind of stuff because of school desegregation, a little rotten. They're working on that now, and they're going to get into more of the voting rights and the desegregation, 1963. But right now, Freedom Riders, we said, well, Mr. Price, what is that? What is the Freedom Riders? Here's basically what it's saying. There's a video on this. A lot of times, most mode of transportation, you just got Boeing creating the jet airplane. You don't have a lot of airline travel. You have bus travel. You have somewhat train travel still in a way, and a lot of people are traveling by bus. But if you're going from the north to the south, or even the west to the south and everything, you're going to experience segregation at bus stops. You say, well, Mr. Price, it's just a bus stop. I've seen those bus stops. There's nothing there. Back in the day, there were diners, there were food, and there were restrooms. That was a key hub for people. And it was segregated. And, and again, separate was not equal. So a lot of the whites and blacks up north said, really, that's not right. It's really, especially a lot of these buses are following the highways and they're interstate highways. So it should be like, it's more about federal control and under the Interstate Commerce Commission, 1887, that should really rule out at this time. And with the 14th Amendment, there should not be any kind of like segregation. Let's get on the bus together, like then, blacks and whites, and let's go to Mississippi. They'll never reach Mississippi, all right, before they get, firebombed and, bus stopped by the, white police force down south, like in Alabama, the Klan and things like that, reforming and kind of like coming together to prevent these Negroes and whites, sitting together on the bus and getting off the bus, sitting together to get served in these, diners, like that, and to use their facilities and being together. It should be, separate facilities, where you belong. But they're doing this. And really now with John F. And by the way, John F. Kennedy and his Attorney General, his brother, Robert Kennedy, they are like really household kind of elite, what we call like, liberals in a way. They are not closed-minded, but they probably they don't know too much about the South. And they know they still need the South again. And you're like, Mr. Price, why do they need the South? The South is still Democrat, all right? Kennedy will appoint a lot of Southern judges to the federal benches. Him and the Kennedy family are more open-minded, but they're probably not as in touch with like, certain people on the ground there about Southern culture and what's going on. But they're going to tend to enforce this, and they kind of don't understand the ignorance that's still kind of pervading the South, and they're like, eventually don't they see the future? It's bound to happen anyway, and you need to make these changes come into the 20th century in a way. So actually they really have success and mine really the end of the year and the next year, all these kind of, interstate, like, bus stops, even throughout the South, are desegregated, enforced by the Interstate Commerce Commission. And again, some of these places like Mississippi, Louisiana, the deep South here, South Carolina, they are, again, it's not happened overnight, but it is kind of like the first step. And plus, a lot of the southern cities said, well, it's not really, affecting inside our towns, inside our schools, but they're a little bit concerned and worried, and you see this going on here. 1962, James Meredith trying to enroll in the University of Mississippi. Robert F. Kennedy gets an escort out there to them, so in there in 1962. 63, things start to heat up in a very, big way, because you see Martin Luther King starts desegregation protest in Birmingham, Alabama. He gets arrested, he writes a letter, and they said, why is this letter famous? The letter's from, like, Birmingham jail. Because he's saying that to end segregation should not be in 10 years, it should not be in 15 years, it should be now. All right? They've already signed the courts about schools and what segregation does to people. It dehumanizes them, it makes them feel inferior. So we should have equal access, and separate was not equal in the theaters, in the parks, in the bathrooms, as you see the multiple pictures in the water fountains, lights, in all those public facilities. It should be, integration now, so we get, opportunities for equality and be treated equal. He gets arrested. It really is, seen on television. Kennedy is really kind of shocked at, like, some of the things, because especially when King kind of gets the, kids to start protesting. Once a lot of, over 100 of the African American, like, leaders and adults are arrested, so they will, like, spell out school. And you see the dogs. That's when you see the classic pictures of here of, like, probably scenes from the first grade. And with television, it really exposes a lot to a lot of people, because really a majority of people saying, wow, that's pretty, that's not, I may not be the most open-minded person, but I don't want to see water hoses that's, like, on, like, young black teenagers and dogs, like, attacking people. What's going on in my country, of the land of the free. So that happens around, and just a couple of the small events. You got George Wallace, who's, saying that, you're not going to integrate Alabama, and on that day, that black students were supposed to go in and to be integrated into University of Alabama. In his inaugural speech, he's the one that's famous says, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. He's one of those classic, like, Orville Faubers, who's kind of like, massive resistance, solid South. We definitely are not going to Southern Manifesto. We're definitely not going to, like, change our culture down there. And a lot of them always say, blacks like being separate, whites like being separate to themselves. That was a lot of the justification for that, and their reasoning for this and everything. It's just the way we've had it. And it's states' rights issue. I know we never heard that before, because, states' rights. So it's always this kind of, like, implication of, like, let the states do what they want to do. Well, what certain states would do, especially down south. They would discriminate, kind of persecute, and kind of intimidate a lot of, blacks, living amongst, the South. So that evening too, I know you guys will not, I get kind of sad here. I get, like, the head of the NAACP in Mississippi, Medgar Evers, is killed in his, driveway, who's shot like that while his children are in the house, assassinated, killed, murdered. Nobody's able to, find out who the killer is, even though a lot of people do know, like, and they even made a movie about it called The Ghosts of Mississippi, about, backward for, he was this guy that kind of even bragged about it in a way, about killing Medgar Evers. And yeah, I know people, the communist price time, and people don't like to be brought up, but it puts things in perspective that, again, to murder somebody who's African American, just sexually assaulted them, nothing happens to you. Really, that's most of our history in America up until about the late 1960s, 1970s in a way. So it's, and I know people, oh, Mr. Price, you know, propaganda, like it's the truth and it's the fact. And I know people don't want to deal with that because it's, you know, I think people rather be lied to, or rather people just to believe what you want to believe in. You don't want to believe in some type of fact. And you know where that can get to you when you don't believe in facts or science and things can happen. Again, sometimes I feel like I'm living in the Middle Ages sometimes to tell people, but I guess that's people. They want to believe in what they want to believe in, even if you present them certain things on there. So he's killed. Now, you know, in 63 here, you get the March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech here. And he's really trying to say we want integration. After that, you know, somebody mentioned this in class too, and it's something that's very poignant because you got poems and songs like, you know, kind of commemorating this tragic event. Girls were thinking about protesting one day on Sunday. Instead, they were told to go to Sunday school. And there's a terrorist act here where, you know, the church is blown up. It's supposed to, you know, there's a bomb there, and four girls, four. Really, you know, I think most of them were like, you know, like their ages are very young, like again, and they're just kids and they're killed. And it really, really is a tragic event in American history. You see these girls making a choice in hindsight, that would end their lives. And I keep on telling you, black church was bombed, and still today, look it up online. Still today in 2020, like some of the most vandalized places are black churches like that. So, and I know people are going to say, well, Mr. Price, you don't know who did it. They could be whites, blacks. True. Most of the times, though, I found that like they've been the victims of some type of, you know, vandalism, you know, by certain people like that. Let's just say, and it's still happening today. And I don't know, I don't know what. I mean, I know this is a Christian nation and everybody says, I believe in Jesus and God, and then you vandalize churches. You know, I guess because, you know, ain't nobody African American. Blow them up, so burn them down like that, you know. So, even in today, like I said, you should really look that up. I know you think I'm giving you propaganda like that, but people are like, well, I don't want to look it up. I don't want to know. Come on, Price, keep on going. What's the timelines? You know, I'm trying to make it kind of a little bit more relatable here. Kennedy gets assassinated. We got November 22nd, 1963. I think with his assassination, you do get a few things going on here, and this kind of that's going to solidify the civil rights movement with his sympathy. And Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat from Texas, really, you know, I say this in an affectionate way. I know people think I'm trying to be using racist language, but he would always say, kind of a redneck type guy that was put on the Kennedy kind of ticket to kind of get Texas, to win Texas. But he knows how to move legislation through, and he's able to get a civil rights bill through by the end of 1964. Civil rights legislation is going to affect like end discrimination in like hotels, theaters, and parks. And again, it's not going to be overnight, but that's what the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, you have to know. Civil rights. But as you know, we've had civil rights that won in, you know, 1873, like that in there, so that, you know, it's going to, it takes so many years before it's really kind of made effective. Took a long time. That, and also, but King is also thinking about voting rights as well. You had a 24th Amendment passed in January of 1964, and that was to like end poll taxes. But he wants a voting rights bill. Lyndon Johnson said, hey, look, man, It's an election year. You're going to have to get that later. I need my Democrats in the South. I'm already going to, I know, and I told you, I've said this before, look, man, the Democrats are going to end in the South. It's going to be, we're going to be done for, because a lot of people are going to move to more of the conservative side of a party, and the Democrats are becoming like too liberal, too left, like the Northern Democrats. So they're going to start gravitating to the Republican Party. The beginnings of that, in a way. So it started before, but again, it starts picking up about like thinking about like, you know, gravitating to a party where it becomes solidly Republican now instead of solidly Democratic. So Rice Bill is passed in '64. You have King wants a voting rights bill, and you know, you get the movie Selma, where he starts like marching like from Selma to Montgomery, and you know, just for fighting for voting rights and registration, and he's make a symbolic march. You know what happens there, like again, people and even like, you know, the police themselves and everything in Alabama will like, you know, turn back the kind of like marchers, and they will, it really becomes confrontational. Lyndon Johnson that year is able to get through legislation. He's not passing it, he signs the legislation, but you know, I always have to correct myself about that, with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, effectively saying that the federal government will enforce, you know, fair voter registration, if need be, like that, you know, and they will monitor the progress of, you know, registration. Everybody should be able to register without a literacy test, you know, that you would have to take. There should not be some kind of means testing too, because of your race and your background or your economic status as well. Poll tax is already outlawed with the 24th Amendment. This is going to just say it's going to be more of an enforcement power for that. You have a right to register to vote. You should not be discriminated against. Really, you know, making sure that you have your voting rights. You know, and of course, you know, the southern states are going to go crazy with this. But really, the writings on the wall, African American voter registration increases. They, you know, just almost like during Reconstruction. Some people call this the Reconstruction Part 2, like 1954 to 1965. That they really, you know, start increasing their numbers, and you're going to see a lot of politicians, you know, besides the really like, you know, the Democrats kind of catering towards it, kind of looking for the African American vote and their constituency, and you know, and support, because it's going to become a significant voting bloc. All right. So anyway, and I know this is probably, you know, again, a lot of gabbing and everything. So I guess some people like the gabbing. They don't want me, you know, talking about like, I don't know, the monkeys they send in space and the dogs. You know, I always wondered about like, you know, in first grade you see the dogs going to space. You see the little like pictures drawn of them back in my day, like that. And I said, oh, that's so cool. I guess they returned and like, you know, had happy lives, and they retired from like NASA and things of that nature. By the way, Kennedy is making a pledge for us to go to the moon in 1961. We get to the moon in 1969. But what happened to those dogs and those monkeys? They just died in space. So I know Russians sent, by the way, Yuri Gagarin is the first man in space, and I didn't send the first woman in space in 1963. That tells you about communist societies trying to, more equality for women at that time in communist societies in a way. But anyway, so the monkey went in space, and he was pressing all kinds of buttons, the wrong buttons, because the monkey realized, listen, man, look, this is a setup. They're using me as like some kind of lab rat. So he was pressing the buttons to get home, to get out of space. He did not want to die. He didn't know, like, look, I didn't know I didn't sign up for a suicide mission. Look, you can put some, like, you know, things to me. You can even shock me a little bit or whatever, you know, and I'll see like that. But I didn't know that, like, hey, you're going to send me to space and I'm not going to get a parachute back into the ocean or some kind of return. So he just started pressing buttons all over the place and everything. So I'm making a lot of mistakes because the monkey was not that dumb. He's like, look, I didn't sign up for this. Anyway, I know people don't like, that was a little off the, you know, stay on topic. So, all right, guys, look, you take it easy. I'm going to have a couple more. I'm always going to be doing around Tuesday and Thursday. And I'm going to have some more updates about, you know, maybe the AP test itself and what's going to happen next couple of weeks, because we're going to start preparing for that test, whatever that form may be. I think I got to think about that in a few weeks. Please look at that Beatles video. It maybe do more to you than me gabbing as well and stuff like that. You guys take care, stay healthy, and hopefully, again, help out each other too. Please help out each other, and make sure, especially if you know somebody that may need something or something, please do that. And I think you guys will. You guys are great. You guys are the best. I have the best students. I always tell it to everybody. It says, what school you teach at? I said, Wake STEM or college. And it says, and they tell me, oh man, the students I got, I had the best students. I had the best students. I always say that. All right, take it easy, guys.